Hi, welcome to Color Light Motion, created and hosted by Victoria Vesna. I'm Bess Rocklitzer, president of the David Bermant Foundation, and I am pleased to introduce Dr. Claudia Schnugg. Claudia is a curator of art and science, researching the intersection of art aesthetics and science technology. It was my good fortune to meet Claudia when she visited the David Bermant Foundation in 2017. Today, Claudia will be discussing one of David's all-time favorites, Clyde Lens, in relation to her own curation. Please enjoy.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to today's 20th episode of Color Light Motion, sponsored by the David Bermant Foundation. Today, I'm so delighted to introduce Claudia Schnugg. We met, we just preparing for this. When did we meet last? 2011. So we made a full circle on the zodiac from one rabbit to the next, and here we are in the year of the rabbit, meeting again. And I've really always loved talking to Claudia, working with her in many different ways, from co-writing to being in the show, to just sitting around with some coffee or tea and having long philosophical discussions. So it was no surprise to me when she picked Clyde Lens as her favorite piece that she would love to talk about in relation to the work that she does. And I was really pleased to have that happen because we tried so many times to bring in Clyde Lens, and of course he's in a place in his life now where I don't think he wants to be in a Zoom meeting. he's in another place. Hopefully he listens to this, and we are really excited about your visit, Claudia. We have two discussants who are your guests. So Andre and Zainab will join us to the end, at the end, to have more discussion and to talk about what you are doing together now. So welcome so warmly.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure being here. Thanks for the invitation. And at the beginning, I thought, oh wow, it's a lot. There's so much to select from, but in the end, I saw that that everything actually came together so nicely that I'm really excited to talk about the pieces in the collection now. So I start sharing my screen. I hope you can see the screen.
Yes, we see it perfectly.
Perfect. And I will start with my talk. So I was calling this experiencing realities from fine-grained data to cosmic events, because on the one hand, of what Clyde Lens' work reminded me of, with all these connections to cosmology, cosmic events, stars, star constellations, but on the other hand, also how to connect this to the data flows that we are now used to work with, and try to understand, and how to bring together all these different technologies to create something to experience. That's what artists who work in the field and try to work with sound and motion and kinetic sculptures and light try to create for the audience. So I thought it's a very fitting title. And I also wanted to make this a very personal talk, or it came out to be something very personal, actually, because I went back to the images that I took when I was visiting the Vermont Foundation in 2017. And here's an impression of how it was like to look into the room with quite a few pieces turned on, and really entering the room for the first time. And it reminded me that it's actually, starting from that, already a very personal story for me, because Many years back, before I came there, I actually wrote my PhD on why do business organizations, people from managers in industry, collect art, work with artists, or bring artists into their organizations. And actually, David Bermant was one of those people whom I came across in my work, and I saw that he was collecting work and bringing works in his business spaces, in the public spheres that he created with the shopping malls. So it was very exciting for me being there. And actually this comes also through how his collection and the work also connects to the threads in the work that I'm doing now. So it will be a little bit of a personal story as well. So I was asked to select 3 works that I want to talk about. And actually, at the beginning, I thought I really want to talk only about Clyde Lynn's pieces because they're really amazing and I love them. But in the end, I chose these 3 pieces. So Clyde Lynn's Rosetta series Moonstone 1, which was in front of the farmhouse, how I experienced it the first time. Then Clyde Lynn's Spectral Wind, and Alejandro and Moira Sina Spinning Shaft, because these 3 pieces also connect to some ongoing work curatorial work that I'm doing and that I've been doing in the past year, 2 years, 3 years, so or actually even more years. So I thought it's a very good connection to the work that I want to introduce too. So the first piece, Clyde Lynn's Rosetta series Moonstone 1, is from 1982. And here is actually a few images that I took in 2017. So I immediately fell in love with this monolith actually in front of the house, because I'm very intrigued by these pieces that resemble also or take up not only art historical references, but also more go even bolder back further into art history or into human history, referring also to in this case the Rosetta Stone, or also monoliths and alignments of monoliths from Neolithic cultures, for example. And I was very intrigued by this. It's a concrete piece with optic fibers and which is with the writing or the engraving lightning during the night. So here's some close-ups that I took, and I couldn't get enough time spending in front of this piece, and Victoria caught me here in this moment when I still spent some time outside, because I really fell in love with this piece. Victoria then told me that it's also one of the favorites of, or was one of the favorites of David Bermant. So as I actually already mentioned before, I find it very interesting when artists try to create also stronger links and also take bolder moves in how to connect their work to art history and also what moves human cultures. What's very impressive also to a single person to encounter. And as you see, I've visited quite a few of these places. For example, the alignments of the monoliths in Canuck or in Orkney, on the Orkney Islands, or throughout Scotland, or in Portugal. And you find these actually often also somehow in alignment or in relationships to celestial constellations, to celestial movements, to the change of the seasons. But they're also often iconic in the sense that they connect to specific cultural inscriptions like the rune stones in North Europe, or as the Rosetta Stone with the translation between languages. On the other hand, and this is actually also something that I want to mention, because it connects like the celestial constellations to something that I want to present later, the monolith, or some in 2001, A Space Odyssey, where this symbolism, but also this strong iconic representation is also shown as something that's positioned in the landscape as something that is man-made or human-made, or produced by whomever, because the shapes do not occur naturally. So it's actually already due to these shapes and how it stands there, a sign that it's something artificially created. Before I go to the other works that also connect to this, I wanted to also introduce Clyde Spectral Wind. It's actually also a piece, it's from 1974, and it's actually also a piece, as you see here, that somehow connects to these monolithic shapes and symbolism, but it has a round front, and what it shows reminds very much of these celestial impressions, and it changes through movement. And this actually is something that also when we talked about this, introducing these works, and actually also focusing on this work, Victoria said, yeah, but you just recently did this show, Cosmological Elements, so there's quite a lot to find in Clyde Lynn's works to connect to most recent works on space art, arts in cosmology, or arts and celestial bodies. So I just wanted to give a little bit of an insight into cosmological elements, but as we just had 3 episodes focusing on that, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but go a little bit further. So as I said, it's a very personal connection that I try to make here. And from this show, which was actually co-curated with Iris Long and shown in Shanghai in December till February this year, we had 27 artworks focusing on different ideas of how we can understand cosmology and how we can actually relate to space, but also to ideas in societies, in cultures, or in ecologies, to understand cosmology from all the different angles that's actually also being discussed. And of course, most of the works relate to space, cosmos, and celestial bodies. And here's an impression of the entrance of the show, and you actually already see 3 more monolithic pieces, although it's more the shape resembling this, but it's plexiglass with a print on the right here in this image. Next, it's Morning Star by Anna Hütjes, next to Victoria Vesna's Alien Stardust, and Angela Davis' System Supporting Life, and Daniela Brilestrada's Our Celestial Bodies. But I wanted to give you this impression that, of course, when you think of star, of cosmos, also artists now are still playing a lot with these symbolism, but also with the same or with similar techniques, working with light, working with movement, trying to understand how we can connect to this experience of the cosmos, also through these elements as an artistic material. And I actually wanted to focus first mainly on Stones by Quadrature, which is actually a piece that came out of a residency at the European Southern Observatory in 2016. And it actually goes back to this idea of how can we create a shape, how can we create this monolithic shape, which is also represented in the 2001 A Space Odyssey, as something that is immediately a reminder that it's something artificially made, and then connected to a deserted space on Earth, if Earth has to be left because of all the environmental impact through human activity, to someone who comes to Earth and tries to find humanity on a different place or different planet. And this work also reflects a lot on what was then at the time a huge hype, this search for exoplanets, which are potentially habitable. It's still something that's very an important strand in astronomy. But as you see here, this piece is also always updated, because the planets that were shown and that were thought of as potentially habitable for humans or to host life, have also, some of them have been proven not to be so. So they are crossed out. So the artist actually invented a language, a binary code of how to find these planets in our solar system, or in actually also in the Milky Way. Again, also trying to understand and how to deal with movement and changes over time in a fixed medium like stone engraving. But as Sebastian gave a detailed insight into this work, I don't want to focus or spend too much time anymore on this. So I actually also wanted to go back to this work that I showed right at the beginning, or mentioned at the beginning in the first image, Anahitya's Morning Star, which actually came out of another residency that I also curated, but just last year in 22 at the European Space Agency at ESTEC, where she actually went there to investigate spectroscopy from an artistic point of view. And when she went there, she was also very much inspired by two aspects, or actually two aspects in the work of the scientists on site, which deal with movements, and specifically also movement that they cannot directly influence because the spacecraft and celestial objects that they're working with are so far away. And on the other hand, also how to visualize these movements. So she worked a lot with orbits, and this is the orbit of Venus. So she tried to understand these movements, and also this kind of, how do I direct something that's so far away from me? So this piece, Morning Star, reflects or tries to understand how we, from a human, but also from an earthly position, see Venus. What is the orbit that we see? And also, how can we direct something on Venus to investigate Venus? So this exploding balloon is a reference to the Vega mission to Venus, which sent their a balloon in the Venus atmosphere to investigate this atmosphere, which eventually exploded. But it also links to other cultural dimensions in human culture, where it also links to the morning star pattern, for example, on stock trade. So also again, dealing with this dichotomy of investigating or exploring Earth and the cosmos, but also exploiting it. And the last piece I wanted to show here, and I wanted to refocus after the 3 episodes on cosmological elements, is another piece by Quadrature Orbits, because I find this is very close to these moving light images and this immersive space that also links back to Clyde Lind's spectral wind. So what they created is actually it's an immersive projection space with sound, where they track space debris and satellites around Earth. This is how we showed it in Shanghai, and here's a quick video. They start from tracking single satellites and single space debris, and track it punctually and calculate distance and velocity, adding more pieces. And in the course of this 20-minute experience, you also get immersed in the space of all these human-made objects in space, but also experiencing again this dichotomy of creating the beauty and this immersive space, but also seeing how intensely this space around Earth is already used. And from there, I want to go actually to some ongoing work and something we're also very happy that André is here and could make it today, which is opening on the 15th of June, Intersecting Reality, an exhibition that I co-curate with André, and where we also deal with this idea of how to create artistic experiences, and how do artistic experiences use different media and fuse all these media to create experiences and also to convey important messages. So go beyond the pure admiration of the technologies or single media used, but really bringing together different media. And looking at these very also through the eyes of looking at the pieces that I selected in the Berman Foundation, I actually also realized that there are three more or less a little monolithic shaped, or at least these column-like shaped pieces in this show. First of all, the first piece that you encounter will be Marco Barotti's Apes. It's a very recent piece from last year, and it's this sound sculpture, or kinetic sound sculpture, where you see the two kinetic pieces that resemble apes on this column-shaped, on this column with the speakers and with four screens. And this piece actually again thinks about how human creativity, but also ability, creates something which then again actually also gets some kind of unstable and insecure, and also connects to ideas of how do we follow blindly at a certain point when we created something, and how do cultures and societies relate between art, craft, cultural ideas, but then also being blinded by their own ideas. And this piece specifically is reflecting on the increasing ability, skill, but also growing consumption and data consumptions when it comes to digital interactions, which then actually also create growing dependencies on data, but also vulnerability to cyber attacks and growing numbers of cyber attacks. Plus, it also is it should be a wake-up call, or is intended as a wake-up call to think about the sustainability of how these directions and paths that have been taken might also create problems. not only about surveillance, cybersecurity, and privacy, but also when it comes to environmental impact. A second piece, and I saw that the artist is also here in the audience, is Sabine So's The Entropist, which is actually also, again, this column or monolith-like shape, but in this time, again, somehow kinetic, because it's an interactive sculpture. So you put your hand into this column, into this space to get it scanned. And here's an idea of how it looks like in the space. And it's again a piece that thinks about this idea of how you create, or about this dichotomy between using or this increasing use of digital media, but also creating incredible amounts of data and traces, thinking about surveillance and security. And what you see here is actually then the projection of how the traces of interacting with the sculptures are then being put together and also worked or overlaid with an AI-powered or generated video. And here you get a small insight into the video of how these traces then come together and are overlain and actually stay there at least for some time and come together in different angles. And as I see time is running, I just jump to the next piece. And this is the third and the most monolithic shape here in this piece. And again, it's a piece that reflects on environmental impact, on the use of digital technologies, on human activity. So it's Theresa Schubert's Glacier Trilogy, Part 3. So we will show the full Glacier Trilogy, but this Part 3, simulating glacial water systems, you can see it here, has this monumental shape with these huge screens. So the piece was created last year throughout her residency, Starts for Waters residency in Italy, where she started to investigate glacial systems, fluvial systems based on glacial waters, but also the decline of glaciers and the changes of the environment. So this piece also again uses light, although it's screens. It's again this idea of how you can interact with this monumental shape, because she also put CO2 sensors that then interact with what is shown on the screens. And what you actually see here, again, I was talking about this human impact on environment, is a simulation of water flows of glaciers in the glaciers melting, modulated on a specific area of the Western Alps in Italy, to understand how the melting of the glaciers influences the glacier, all these water flows and the environment. And then, of course, with the CO2 sensors, how really creating this direct connection between how we impact the environment and nature with human activity. And again, you've got this dichotomy between the beauty of what you see and the problems that it's actually relating to, but still creating this very immersive experience. From that, I want actually to go to the third piece that I mentioned at the beginning from the collection, Alejandro and Moya Sina's Spinning Shaft. This piece I really wanted to show because it actually is a very, very impressive kinetic light sculpture. Here, a photograph that I took in 2017 with my not so good mobile phone back then. here a few more images, impressions from the webpage from the Bermant Foundation. It's very interesting for me how from moving kinetic sculptures, from moving light, you can create these beautiful and wonderful impressions. And going back to this, to the selection or to the collection and the book of the David Bermant Foundation, it struck me that actually right now I'm still working with one artist who is also exactly using these movements and these ideas and these kinetic light sculptures in his practice. And it's in this project that I show here, the Naturarchy Residency project of the SciArt Project of the European Commissions, where I'm honored to be one of the two external co-curators on the project, working with 15 residency artists. And one of them is Johannes Kepler, the tipping point. Johannes is a Greek artist, and he's originally a physicist. And from his background, he started to work specifically with kinetic light sculptures. And the tipping point will be a series of kinetic sound sculptures, actually also going back to the similar idea of what we saw with Marco Barotti before, where we have the sound also part of these sculptures with a supplementary projection. And this work is, as it says, so in the title, is about tipping points, also the tipping point and tipping points. It's, as you see here, it's currently in production. So Johannes is working, is developing this immersive experience. And here we also go back to this idea of the experiencing realities. These immersive experiences of what it means actually to have a tipping point happening. So he will create these 24 metronomes with light and speakers that will make sound in an enclosed room. And we talked a lot about this idea of how do you actually create something really new and really impressive about something urgent as the conversations around tipping points and human impact on environmental, on the environment. And I guess we all have seen quite a lot works that talk about or that use the graphs and show us what will happen if we have 1.5 degrees more, with what will happen if we have 2 more degrees, what will happen if the first tipping point will go and these glacial waters will melt, what will happen if the permafrost will melt, and so on and so forth. But it's very rational and a very cognitive discussion. So he uses his kinetic sculptures to really create, as I said, some kind of an unbearable situation to really make it experienceable, how an environment can change if something dramatic happens. So here's another impression, because we also wanted to have some kind of additional information. So here you can see a visualization in the back also about changes in temperature. The metronomes will be the main source of sound, and they start very slow and then they will change. And with the change of the rhythm, also the light will change in this environment. This is actually a prototype that he shared with me, so it's not yet the final, but it already gives the impression. Also, the sound is not final yet, but it starts really as a very rhythmic environment. But then, the more tipping points fall and the more the environment changes, the more different these metronomes will take, and the faster and the more intense the whole experience will be. And as I said, there will also be some additional information in projection. And here's some, so the changes or the influence of the tipping points will also be connected to loss in biodiversity. And there is already a lot of discussion around that. And again, the loss in biodiversity is very difficult to follow from a human scale, because it's also this idea of how can we connect to something that happens beyond the local space that we experience immediately on a more global level. How does it connect to something, or how can we, with our human senses, connect to something that happens over a time span that is too long for us to really keep up with? So there's this this visualization that starts from these squares, and all the squares equal 1,610 species, and it actually shows how species get lost. And it starts in with the beginning of the notation that he has at hand, that shows a full spectrum of species and then how they start to get lost. The beginning in 1902 or 3, nothing happens, but then when you go to the 1960s, it starts happening that biodiversity starts to decline, and always faster and faster. And with every square, it's 1,610 species lost or absent, not found anymore. And it's not about the total, but it's again about what is already lost by now, which ends with this very scary blackness, but it's only 2023. And with this piece, I wanted to show and wanted to go to the last piece of that I announced that I wanted to show. It's Marco Barotti's corals. And going back to these pieces, I thought I really cannot show it without showing a fourth piece from the collection of the Berman Foundation. That's Victoria Vesa's Nano Mandala. And it connects so beautifully to the corals. So this piece connects the micro and the macro. It connects spiritual culture and scientific culture through this artwork. And here you can see an impression from the website from the Berman Foundation. And here's some of the very, very bad images that I took when I was there seeing it, going really from very specific images to this full-blown image of the mandala that they did with the monks, and then going into the nanoscale and onto the sand, which also gives an additional structure to the piece. And I really found this very beautiful connection to this last piece that I wanted to show, and that I find very well connected to this idea of connecting different levels of human experience, human realities, and all these different artistic materials and artistic media into a full-blown audience experience. So this is the latest work by Marco Barotti that we will show, and we will open next week on June 9th for the first time at the TU Berlin as a Science Gallery Berlin residency. And Marco went to the Bifold, which is an AI and big data institute at TU Berlin, to work with or take a next step with his kinetic sound sculptures, where he wanted to integrate different machine learning models and new ways to deal with data, because his his sound sculptures and his kinetic sound sculptures have been driven by data in the previous years. So this is coral, so you just get a sneak preview here before everybody else sees it. So corals is a piece about coral bleaching, and it's a piece that wants to, or that reflects on corals, or what on specifically on these iconic branch corals, which are specifically prone to environmental stress and thus to coral bleaching, and their movement and how movement underwater and the coral movement and environmental impact actually change these movements and these visual impressions and the sound. This piece brings together not only scientific research and data on Earth observation data on how ocean surface temperatures change, how toxins or acidification impact on corals. It also brings in a lot of research on corals, but also on how to create or support to corals. And interestingly, just recently, some scientists made some trials to show that bringing back sounds of healthy coral reefs also supports biodiversity to come back to these coral or devastated coral reefs to support coral reef restoration. So Marco actually went on one of his trips to South Korea to a shaman, and he participated in a shamanistic ritual and was allowed to record it. So he's now fusing in this piece the sound of healthy coral reefs with the sound of shamanistic music, creating this very beautiful and poetic interaction between, or symbiosis between, technology and cultural and spiritual activity, bringing together these different realities into this scientific knowledge of, or at least first tries of how to support coral reefs and how to create thriving environments. This piece does not only show this one impression of the coral reefs. As I said, all his works are data driven, so it's driven by real-time data. So it shows different impressions of coral areas, and if there are bleaching alerts in certain areas. So he draws from the NOAA database, and on these bleaching alerts areas, and there are 4 different bleaching alert scenarios. So this, what you just saw, was just this thriving coral reef. There is another impression that I can give you, and this is the actually already level 3 alert. Because as soon as coral reefs start to bleach, they also get there's less sound and less, they start to get quiet. They not only get white, they also start to get quiet. And suddenly also all the biodiversity starts to leave. And actually this is also the moment when not only very or not only the healthy reef sound is mixed into this experience, but also the impression of the shamanistic healing rituals, because Marco also went to from a previous recording from a Peruvian shaman on a healing ritual. And the idea is actually to create more and more of these encounters with different spiritual environments where he wants to in future also mix in different healing rituals into these very strong alert modes of the kinetic sound sculptures. And here's just a last impression, because as you also see these coral reefs, you also see one screen. And on this screen, the real-time data is actually shown, as you can see it here, with the different bleaching alert areas. And the different bleaching alert areas are randomly selected, but also randomly selected other areas that are not in danger yet. And this is a visualization of the data of NOAA and with the bleaching alert areas. So, and with this, I wanted to end. Thank you.
That was really terrifyingly beautiful work.
Thank you.
I would like to invite Andre and Zeynep to join us. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about your relationship to the two guests. And Bess is still around, which is wonderful.
Thanks for still being here. And hi, Andre, and hi, Zeynep. Thanks for joining on that short notice. As I mentioned before, Andre is my co-curator in the Intersecting Realities show. And it was really an honor to be invited by him to co-curate this show with him on this idea that he brought forth on post-digital intersections. He and his team created this bigger project in Romania for the cultural capital of Timisoara, where there's also a mentoring program for art students, and there will be also a final exhibition in December by the art students' work. And then I also want to introduce Zeynep. Zeynep is working at VAC Society, and she's also writing her PhD in art science collaboration. And I thought it would be wonderful to have her here, because this is also something. It's an angle that I also always take into my curatorial, but also into my research work. So I think she's a wonderful contributor to talk about collaboration practices and residencies, and the value of how to bring art science and technology together in these non-disciplinary, cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary encounters.
So wonderful. Thank you both for joining and introducing both of your guests is great. It's the amount of the wonderful connections you made just is, to me, very touching, because it's personal, and at the same time you can see how these foundational works really had an influence on our approach. And one of the things that I noticed that really struck me in the chats is how people were saying how beautiful, it's so beautiful, it's so beautiful. And at the same time, it's so frightening, it's so frightening, it's so frightening. So, and you also mentioned this dichotomy of, people enter into it and they see all this space junk, but it looks gorgeous. What do you feel, question to all of you, about this? I guess the way I see it from my perspective is it's almost like an eye candy to pull people in, and then hopefully they will go deeper and understand what it is. But I'm curious what you're thinking in relation to curating or art science. So I don't know if Andre wants to take it first or Zainab.
I can go first.
Okay.
I'm not sure it's only about being eye candy, because I think it's sort of a next evolution for art, because at least in the past decades, art has moved towards something that is really nice to look at, but somehow losing the fundamental meaning that used to hold somehow. And in art, science, and tech collaboration, it seems like art is moving towards that societal goal of transmitting information, of making things visible. But of course, it needs to do it in the language of art, which is the pretty eye candy that you mentioned, let's say.
So it's, you see it as an attractor by connecting to what we would consider beautiful / art, because a lot of people don't consider this art, right? Still. Still.
Well, I think this is changing, and once people get to understand the reasons behind it, and that art is something more than a pretty thing to put on the wall and look at, I think that this will change more and more, and this will be considered legit art, so to speak.
Yes, I agree. I'm hoping it's taking so long. When I met Claudia 12 years ago now, we both were lamenting how everybody was saying, what's art got to do with science? But that's changed hugely. It's almost like a tidal wave now, where everybody's talking about it, working on it, which is wonderful. It really is a really good thing. So it must be great for you, Zainab, because you're right in this perfect storm.
Yes, it certainly is. And really, my sincere appreciation and thank you to both of you, Victoria, Ivana, but mostly Claudia. It's an absolute pleasure to be in this crowd. Well, I have maybe a note to make on top of what Victoria kind of prompted, and a question. In all of these artworks, which were obviously beautiful, but beyond beautiful, I think they also have this unique quality of being an interface between the human and the non-human scale that we're trying to grasp or perceive through some form of embodiment. And they do it at different scales, which is fascinating. What I find also in the science and technology embedded residencies most challenging is the artwork's relationship to data. In a way that the data component is where it stems from. And I'm really curious about how, through different artistic investigations and artistic expressions, this tension between the truthfulness of data is used or navigated with the aesthetic concerns, which drives that poetic expression, which at the end is intended to move the audience. And I'm also curious whether in your experience, whether the audience responds to the phenomena through the form itself, or to the technology and the technological aspects embedded in those artworks.
Should I, or you want to say something, Victoria? Because I've been discussing this a lot with quite a number of artists. So I experienced that for many artists, it's important to stay true to the data, at least at certain points, and true to the theories, at least as much as the poetic and aesthetic representations allows, because, and I think this also links a little bit to what Andre said before, that arts also has some kind of activist role these days when it comes to, specifically sustainability, environmental impact, and so on and so forth, and also critical reflection of how we use data and how we use new technologies. As soon as you go or you go too far from this truthfulness, you experience that it will be dismissed as this call for action. But
there is a tipping point there.
Yeah. But on the other hand, it does not mean that everything has to be 100% according to scientific data, according to scientific forms. As you see, Marco Barotti uses these abstract shapes that are representations that, as he also calls meta creatures, of what he's referring to in these ecosystems. Or when you look at Oren Katz and Jonas and their work, which is also doable, and it's not true to biotechnology, but it also has a lot of question marks and a lot of exaggerations to raise questions. Or when you look at Anna Domitrio's work, for her, it's always important to have at least the real DNA there, or the real bacteria, even if they're killed. And so just to have this real connection and this translation between, we are not talking about anything that's science fiction, we are talking about something that's here. It's not something projected into the future alone.
So I would like to add something to that science fiction comment, because the really good science fiction actually is based on facts, is based on really good research, and then it's projection out. And I believe the same is true for art science. The really good works, you can see a deep relationship with a scientist, one or a group, that keeps going back and forth, where the ideal is to reach that sweet spot that's neither, in a way, that just kind of shifts the way at that point is both sides and becomes one. And it's a really, it's like tightrope, because you don't want to be didactic, and the scientists tend to want you to illustrate the work, but you also don't want to be too poetic and just throw out quantum, whatever, that then you'll just alienate the scientists. So to see this kind of work that really was collaborative, and it's not only science, by the way, it's also curators. So for instance, you influence how artists also put their work together, how we project what we do in the space, right? That becomes a collaboration too, that a lot of times is ignored. But in connection to Clyde Lentz, it's actually a super interesting thing to know that he did not create works with concrete initially. He created the works that you saw, Claudia, that were in plexi, and then fiber optics, and that was easy. And because David was a businessman and he had the malls, that's how he made his money, he wanted to spread this to the public. So a lot of the works that were commissioned in the collection that were actually public artworks. And he asked Clyde, can you do this in concrete so it can be outside? And so he literally shaped his work in a way by asking for the commission. A lot of commissions do, and a lot of residencies that you host, they absolutely shape. You walk in one way, you walk out with completely different ideas. But ideally, you're collaborating. I think it's at this stage, excuse me, at this stage, we're still educated so differently that you can't suddenly become an astrophysicist and artist at the same time, right? But you can work with an astrophysicist and exchange those ideas. So I think it's a tough line, because it's become a bit in vogue, and it actually, you see a lot of work that's just so surface and just kind of using even sustainability, even ecological issues can become mundane in my mind sometimes, the way it's approached. So I'm curious about what you think as collaborators with artists and scientists? All of you.
I would like to add something to everything that was said before, because there's a concept that me and Claudia have been exploring for the Timisoara project, and is art as a proxy for knowledge somehow. Because what we've been seeing over and over is that knowledge is far greater than we can comprehend, and it has extended far beyond what used to be like 50 or 60 years ago. And also knowledge expresses itself at nanoscopic scales, very, very tiny stuff that we cannot perceive directly. So building also on what you said, the first tendency in art, as you mentioned, as it becomes more popular, the first tendency in art and science is just to make a representation of what science and scientists do. But real collaboration and real transdisciplinary approaches arise when you actually interpret the knowledge. And it's like any kind of statistical data or any kind of large data sets, that you have to look at them from a certain angle. So even that, even if through art you transform them and you give them sort of a subjective view or a certain angle, starting from something real, something accurate, is equally important to the artistic perception of it.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Yeah, and it's speaking of knowledge and scale, what Zainab was mentioning, we cannot even imagine the things we're talking about. Do you know what I mean? Our bodies and our brains are just not designed to it. I was recently at the Livermore National Lab with Dr. Geckelman and our students, and they were describing to us, there's this one small, like a little pearl, if you imagine, a perfect pearl, that's the target. And then there's lasers that are 3 football fields pointed at. It's just like, really? You expect me to imagine this? I mean, it's mind-boggling. So to try to bring this to the public becomes another mind-boggling problem, because our senses are so narrow, and the knowledge is just exploding with AI now and ChatGPT. It's like we're just drowning in knowledge. The machine's taking over. So I'd actually, Zainab, if you would go a little more into scale, and Claudia, all of you, because I think it's in the works that you were presenting, it's all about scale in a way. We're looking at these enormous spaces, and we're so small, and at the same time we're so arrogant, right, as a human race.
I think, though, through these types of works, we are reminded of our own scale. And yes, and I'm wondering if we, as the viewer, are responding to the scale or a moment of that scale, or just a fraction of that scale through these artworks, because it's also about their ability to capture that scale, which is quite, again, limited with the tools and the interfaces that we're using, and therefore I'm wondering whether it is the scale that captures us as the viewer, or the intensity of the phenomena that we're responding to.
I like the idea of that we're in the moment of the scale. It's lovely.
I think it's, so what I wanted to say is there's what I feel what these works can do, and it's not only about making scale or creating new knowledge or creating a better or the right access to the scale or to whatever dimension, because the scale it can be dimension in physical scale, big or small. It can be time, going back, going forth. So how do we experience now that there's so many species lost that were there in 1902? we don't know them, we haven't seen them, how we experience our limited environment. How do we understand temperature changes or tipping points which are already in process? How do we experience these changes with what we have? But on the other hand, even if we just transmit or talk about knowledge and what knowledge is there and what kind of information about these scales, it's so big, so small, so scary that the mind just can't comprehend. So how can we link it somehow to our senses and to our bodies to create an access point and to create a different way of engaging, to at least understand a bit, or to get at least the first step into a direction of, oh, now I start understanding, now I start connecting to something that I was not aware of before, or that was super difficult to understand before. And of course, what I showed from, for example, from the quadratura pieces was stones and orbits, but from the residency also another piece emerged which was about binary balance in celestial systems. And this piece is not at all true to any theory, but it actually creates this tension when you look at it, that you just really feel how important this balance is and how it evolves between two rocks, because it's two rocks on a metal plate that try to balance this metal plate on a very thin central point. So it's really about this kind of balance. So it does not make you know any theory, but it creates an access to an emotional experience that you know that, okay, if this balance is lost, then everything will fall apart. And this shows how important it is. So I think these experiences, it's not only about representing, it's also about creating this emotional connection. It's also creating an idea of how do I feel, or how would I feel, or how does it feel?
And hopefully ignite curiosity, right? So that you leave wanting to find out more, or just discover your own path of what's going on, right? Raise questions more than answers, because nobody has the answers, really. None of us, no matter what discipline. We're all just asking questions.
And would you say that that intent as to the potential impact or impact area of the artwork is more a part of the artistic intention or the curatorial intention?
I think that the intent somehow starts from the artist, because artists in their projects and their artworks have the entire process in view and start exploring from a certain point of origin and start going around it and talking with scientists and so on. And whether curators, and this has been my experience in the Intersecting Realities exhibition, is just connecting these different artworks to tell a coherent story, and not to puzzle the viewers more, or just to daze them, but to create a story that takes them through interconnecting pieces that make sense together, and building up to this common knowledge and not just disparate points. And if it makes sense.
If you talk about the exhibition, but on the other hand, as also Victoria said before, and I think, André, we had this discussion also recently in Paris at ICEA, to talk about the process. An artist also has their process about what is the next step, what do they actually say. So when you work as a curator with the artist throughout the process, or with the artist and the scientist throughout the process, you also have a very important supportive role there. Also to guide this process, not to get stuck at something that has been said before, or is not as deep because it's easier, or it's already there and it can be grasped, but it might be more interesting for the audience when you as artists have to or start to think about this idea of how do we, what's the best way to approach the audience and how to do this. So I think it's good to always have at least someone to talk to. At the end, it might be the artist, or it will be the artist's decision, but I think it's often good to have someone to talk to, at least from my experience. It depends also a bit on the artist, on their experience as well, but
yeah, it's sort of a mediation goal between the scientist and the artist, because in my experience, each of them have very strong opinions and are very attached to their body of work. And usually scientists feel that art somehow transforms everything into a mundane approach, whereas artists need to have their freedom and explore without caring so much for the scientific restrictions. So yeah, I think the curator sort of has this mediation goal between the two parties, but it's more in the background. I mean, as unseen as possible, so as not to influence the process so much, but rather guide it towards an outcome that is desirable for both parties. At least that's the way I see it somehow.
Can I say something, Victoria?
Absolutely. Come on in, David.
Yeah, I see my...
David Familian is the art director at the Beal Center of Art and Technology, and a good friend and the curator also.
My approach is I see it as sort of the producer, like in the old Hollywood sense, when the producer actually knew about cinema, not a business person. And so I'm talking about the good side of producing, not the...
He's coming in from LA, okay, so he can't help it.
and I think we, most of the curators that we're doing this know the field. It's not, we have a deep understanding of the science and the art, not just the art, and what that dynamic should be between the scientist and the artist. And I think for me, it's making sure the artist and the scientists are capable of even collaborating. That you sort of have to do a kind of psychological processing to see, is this possible? Is this person open enough to collaborating, or are they just is the artist going to impose their aesthetic on the scientist, and is the scientist going to be resistant to the artist? So that's sort of, how I would talk about what you're all, how
I would like to add one thing, and because there's also another opportunity or option. The artists or the scientists are too scared to say everything that they want to say. And you need to push them to say everything that they want to do.
Yeah.
And then I will add a third thing here. I think that a lot of it has to do with long-term relationship and long-term friendships. Because if artists and scientists are friends, it kind of stops being about discipline, and the larger philosophical questions start seeping in, and that becomes a kind of a motivation to explore that, which motivates and inspires the scientists to go back to their work with a different viewpoint, to the artist the same, where again, it's really about finding that in-between spot, because we're still talking about it as these two separate domains, these two different individuals that have to be shepherded somehow to come together, which can be done, and it's quite an effort. And sometimes it succeeds. Most of the times it doesn't, because it's almost artificial. And a good example is my recent, what I mentioned with Walter Geckelman, plasma physicist. We've known each other for 15 years. And it's always been kind of, it didn't quite work. We didn't quite connect. He had very much a certain point of view, and I would look at art in the classic way, and etc. But it's kind of softened over the years, and as he's come more into a place where he's looking back and looking at all the new research and where it's going, he's very interested now in looking at it philosophically. He's very interested now in opening up to ideas that seemed ridiculous maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And the same with my partner Jim. I think he's an extreme example because he's always fused that and opened himself up to it. He's an experimentalist, and a lot of experimentalists are pretty much open to it, to this kind of collaborative work. But what he's pointing out now is that science has reached a limit, that there is a point where they need people from the sidelines who are comprehensivist, experimental artists, work with technology, so it's the same language, to push where it needs to go. It's the reductionism has reached a limit. It's really a place where, yeah, you can keep going down to the atom, and then what? What are you going to do with that? And why are you doing it? These questions start emerging. But it's not an easy fix. It's not something that can put two people together and make it happen. That's very rare. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen. It's very rare at this point, anyway, with our disciplinary silos. So David knows this very well. He's been putting together artists and scientists for quite a bit, but the reason he's so successful with this, and same is true for Claudia. I don't know your work as much, Andre, sorry. They look for artists who already have relationships with scientists, or who are kind of nerds at heart and like discover stuff about DNA or the space or whatever it is. Then it's easy because the language barrier starts to break very quickly. And the artist is excited, the scientist is impressed. Like, wait, you know this stuff? How do you know how this works?
I mean, that happens. I watch their faces. There was this happened once where the artist was talking to a quantum physicist, and within 5 minutes they were laughing, and I had no idea what they were talking about because they were laughing and talking. I knew that things were going well, but in relation to what Victoria just said, we've had this discussion for many years, and Victoria's process doesn't work for me because I can't wait that 15 years. I have to come in at the end of the 15 years when they've got something. So I found this, and I can't just obviously match people up randomly. So I do pick artists that already are well versed in the field, and then get ready, and then it goes it's gone very smoothly most of the time. And the 6 projects with the Getty, it's gone very well.
Yeah, no, it's actually amazing how much it's shifted, and a lot of it is because new young scientists are much more open to creative collaborations. It's not as much of a push. So maybe they just need
almost all of them are assistant professors.
Yeah,
it's absolutely true. They're all, I'm shocked with the pressure they're under, because it's not like you're getting a full professor in art. These people have to come up with research that they can prove, otherwise they don't get tenure. I mean, it's like a whole different set of pressures, but almost all of them have been assistant professors, which has been shocking through the whole. I think Chico is working with a full professor, but that's been about it. Almost all have been assistant professors.
and that's a really big progress, because in the past you were not able to work with young professors because they would be afraid that somehow they would be blacklisted if working with artists. That still happens in some countries, but it's pretty much opened up slowly. What's your experience with that, Claudia?
I think because SaveNet has also quite a lot of experience with the residencies. My experience is so for some projects I also pick the artists depending on what I want to do. So for example, for the research project, a scientific research project that the Department of Business Informatics in Linz, I really handpicked the artists about to fit into the artistic research that we want to do at the department for the scientific research, or just to bring or merge the artistic and the scientific research. And most of the artists do not have previous experience, but they also don't need to, because it's not they are guided also, they're working with me and with also with Daniela Pilestrada. She's also got this art science background, so it's also very easy for her to work with both, more as a curator, although she is the researcher in that sense, connecting two different sides of research with the artists. In other projects, often work with open calls, and of course it's easier with, as David just said, not waiting the 15 years, but working with experienced artists, or really working as experienced curator to push them. I think also at another moment I had some of these conversations with Zeynep to really also push the artists to really dare to be also challenging and to suggest something really new and interesting. Because on the other hand, yes, a relationship can also develop in a residency. Maybe it's not as deep, but I think if you already set the framework as a curator and say, okay, we are also interested in this philosophical discussion, we raise these questions and we put them up front before they meet, it helps. But of course, I often in these selection processes have, when artists, for example, apply with ideas, I also have some mainly, so it's not one person who decides who will be the artist. There's also the scientific side, having an eye on what is interesting also for a scientist. Is this something relevant or not? So actually, I've dealt with many of these different instances, and they all can work if they are supported. But what's not working is if there's just no personal connection and people don't like each other.
That's true. That
But
is
yeah,
true. That's
And I
definitely
can
the bottom line.
top this up. I just want to start my research all over again with this beautiful crowd. What's rewarding is to hear things that have come up in the past 2 years with my 45 respondents and interviewees. And it is a small community, but I would like to top this up with bridging artists and open up another Pandora's box here, where we get into sometimes the extreme instrumentalization of art, which we're trying to steer away from. How to bridge the artist with the industry organizations where they work with engineers who have come from scientific backgrounds in most of the cases, but who have been wired to think in terms of solutions, in terms of very strict boundaries, and we're trying to inject artists into these organisms, and that's a real challenge, which I really, really love. I call it a delicious tension. And Claudia has helped us to guide some of the decisions, some of the criteria through which we, or the lenses through which we look at these residencies and industries. So an equally nice challenge is to, how do we bridge without breaking art apart? Artists with engineers, with technology.
Just on that point, I would say that the engineers, especially, will say, no, you can't do that, is sort of the answer a lot of the times, because they can't see, if they can't see that what you said, the solution at the end, they've never tried it, they'll say it won't work. And I think finding those engineers, I think everyone's experienced that no, and either they have to find someone else that's open to say, well, let's try it and see what happens. So I think that's the other, that I imagine that's something you've come across, where they don't want to try that suggestion and see if it works.
True. Yes, that's a good point. My challenge and my ambition was to make people comfortable with the idea that this is a huge experiment, which will most likely produce something, but we also have to trust and that even if something that is not so grandiose comes out from the process, it will produce something. So for the engineer to work with that kind of ambiguity is a nightmare.
It's a nightmare.
that we have to guide.
I experienced this also just recently with very young scientists, where an artist is a very young artist, just did his master's, is working with a nanoscientist. She's the co-head of the department, and she's leading a big group. And because she doesn't have that much time, she also invited quite a few of her colleagues, or actually her lab members, also doctoral students and postdocs. And they also cannot deal with this ambiguity because they're very much used to very structured approaches, predefined processes, predefined experiments, predefined questions. So she now actually also is aware of how much this is challenging her lab members and how this actually is also important for them to learn that they have to deal with this ambiguity.
And it's a fragile balance because usually when these kind of extended members of the team get involved, they somehow feel forced to participate in these projects for which they don't see, especially if they are young researchers, they don't see the purpose of them. And going back to what you guys said before, finding geeky artists, it works the other way around. What we've done, what I've seen is that if we find artistic researchers who have a passion for art or who do photography as a hobby or whatever, they're much more open to interacting and going into this sort of unstable field of art science collaborations. So I think it works both ways.
It does work both ways, and there is a difference between engineers and hard scientists, because engineers really need to make the plane fly. I mean, they are programmed to make things work, and so it's a little bit like an applied art. So a designer, for instance, is used to working on what the client wants, for instance, not breaking rules and doing whatever they feel like, which is basically what we do. So it's, and everything has its place, by the way. So it's not like one or the other, but there's different roles that can take place, and in the end, it truly is about education, or should I say bad education, that just divides all of us up and makes it hard to cross over because we're taught different languages, we're taught different ways of communication. I mean, I asked Dr. Geckelman to give a short talk to the class that we're co-teaching about plasma physics, and I begged him to make it really understandable. And he spent all this time working on it, genuinely. And then the beginning of his talk was, everything can be explained in 4 equations. I made this super simple for all of you, and I could see all the art students. It was a mix. The science students were kind of, yeah, let's hear this. And the art students were looking at me like, what are you doing to us? And I was like, just pretend that it's your first lesson in a Mandarin class. We're learning Chinese.
That's too funny. Victoria, this is Patricia. I'm not presentable, so I'm not showing my video, but could I make a comment?
Of course you could.
Okay.
Hi, Patricia. This is Patricia Olenek. She's an artist friend and fellow in medicine and media arts at UCLA Arts.
Right. Well, and absolutely. And, you know, the fact that I'm a fellow at your institution and not at my own actually precedes what I want, the comment I'd like to make, because sort of listening to all the speakers and thinking about the instrumentalization of art, or even where art sits in the larger kind of set of priorities of university leadership, I think plays a huge role in whether or not these kinds of collaborations can occur. And I don't know if any of the speakers have thoughts on the kind of art design divide that some institutions have. And at my own institution, the last 5 years, I've been seeing all of the funding and collaborations going into design, so design can collaborate with science and engineering. But there's really not any space. We have new transdisciplinary incubators, but they're expected to produce more funding for the university. But there really, it is this real instrumentalization, right? That you get designers with engineers so that you can open a human computer interaction program, and then this will have deliverables of a certain kind. So I think that support for open-ended generative processes really is becoming a very endangered space. And I would just love to hear the speakers sort of talk about this, because I think if you don't have an ArtSci center at your school, it is impossible, really. Even if you collaborate with a dean, will step in and shut that down because it's not making that person tenurable. So it's a real problem without the right structures. So I'd like to put that comment forth and hear thoughts from anyone who'd like to comment.
Thank you. Who wants to take that on?
Maybe just a small comment, Patricia. I think it's a brilliant prompt and a question. I'm a member of the Erasmus University, so we are in a very hardcore arts and culture department, which has ambitions to expand in this art, science, and technology domain, and we have established, or at least tried to establish, what we called Rotterdam Arts and Sciences Lab, which for the last 4 years has not been able to go beyond providing education, or again, still siloed from different art academies, training or education modules to be made accessible. Not mandatory, but accessible to students. But still, we are far from making it an experimental space because of all these, tenure and academic performance indicators that a lot of academic professionals need to follow. So we are still not there, and I think it takes another type of courage and an alternative career path to make it a success, because it's just not possible if you're going to. I have shot myself on the heel a couple of times because I did not do a qualitative research. I did not do a quantitative research. I did a mixed method research. Well, that is, you can't get published here. You can't get published. It's a whole struggle. On top of that, I'm not researching art. I'm not researching science. It's not technology. It's so even that space for making your work accessible is very limited. But because I'm lucky that I don't have a very hardcore academic orientation, I can take it and I just walk with it wherever I go.
It still is very, very difficult. You're talking to someone who had to put myself up 3 times for full professor promotion, because all the time everybody was understanding everything I do until I came to that point. And it was like, what is she really doing? Is it art? This is exactly what you're talking about. And I mean, how else can you break through? And eventually you do, persistence pays, but it really is disturbing because you just feel like there's these gatekeepers to education, to the art world, to the industry, to the science world. And you can see it in science as well. Scientists who are also trying to open those gates are finding real hardcore blocking and obstacles. I know Claudia went through a lot too. I mean, all of us have our stories. I'm sure Andre and David, we could talk about it all day, but it really, Patricia, what you're going through is a version of what all of us have. Even if you have a center, you still, we have to self-sustain. We have to bring everything together. We're working, nonstop to, where is the full-on support? You know what I mean? So it's in its infancy, but at the same time, there's a need and there's a demand, and there's kind of a big wave now happening that's bringing in art and science. To circle it back to David Vermand, he was very much about connecting art and science and technology. He was really looking for artists like Pike and Alan Rath, etc., who were making these connections and the fascination, and somebody that actually helped put this foundation in place by collecting it, by treating it as art, which was unheard of at that point in the 60s, 70s, etc. So thank you so much, everybody. We could keep going. And particularly to our featured speaker, spotlighted. Thank you, Claudia, for doing this. It was an absolutely beautiful talk, and we're very happy to have you. Thank you. Give me your hands, everybody.
And thanks, Zeynep and Andre, for joining.
Bye.